Okay, so we have a pretty good time here, and I have already 4 hands from the room and 1 from online. So why don't we start with these 5? And please introduce yourself when you start. And Jen, you were first.
Okay. So. I'm Jed Schilling. I'm an economist retired from the World Bank, working on a lot of environmental factors, including evaluations. And I did one with Juha up at UNDP on the poverty environment nexus. And this is very interesting. It's making very good progress for GEF. I've got a couple of comments leading to a deep question. It's very important to have this link between the economy, the environment, and society. Those things are actually, in the real world, very tightly linked. The economy depends totally on the environment and the society. Society depends on the economy and the environment. So the economy is the foundation of those activities. So it's very important to protect it. And I've worked with the Millennium Institute. We've developed an integrated system dynamic model that links the economic, social, environmental factors and generates long-term scenarios to show what the effects of different policies or assumptions about factors will be across all of these sectors. So it's very useful. We've done it locally, countrywide, regionally, and national and globally. So that's very good. And I think you talked about taking account of the local groups, the positive and negative effects, and how they have to be balanced out of protecting various environmental systems. That's very important, and it's good to take into account these externalities, but it has to go beyond local areas. It goes well beyond that. I also work with the Mountain Institute, which is working on protecting mountain ecosystems around the world. And one of the things they're coming up with is setting up a global water tower project, because mountains are the source of over 60% of the fresh water people downstream depend upon. So the people downstream have to support the people in the mountain protecting those ecosystems and making sure they get water downstream. So these things lead to the question that I really come up with of how and to what extent we can or are going to deal with it, is in protecting the environment going forward. We have to decide, what does a sustainably protected environment look like? It's not going to look like the environment 50 years ago or in 1950, because we now have 3 or 4 times as many people, many times as much economic activity. Going forward to 2050, we will have even more than that. So if we look at this change, the real question over this longer term view is what and how can we, with GEF and others, determine what the sustainable environment needs to look like with this very changed global situation and with climate change. Because many areas that used to be able to grow crops at the base of mountains or grow and maintain biodiversity no longer can support the biodiversity. It's going up mountains or it's going someplace else. So this question is, to what extent can or is GEF beginning to address the shift of what a shifting sustainable ecosystem is going to look like and how we can protect that, not just try to protect things the way they are in the face of all of these challenges and changes.
Thanks very much. We move on now. I think Tom was the...
Thanks a lot. Great presentation, by the way, Aaron, and for the entire IEO team, I would just like to say this is a very robust piece of work. It's certainly setting the bar very high, and it's certainly something that we're going to be using in terms of the data sets for a number of years now. Just following up on a couple of these last points, and Nigel, your last points on the socioeconomics of this, I think, going back to your recommendation number 2, Aaron, that is probably looking forward. The robustness of the data that we currently have, the geospatial data, the species data that we currently have, it's going to be, it's probably the best it's ever been now. It's automated. It's certainly light years ahead of where it was even 5 years ago. The real weakness we have, of course, is thinking about the socioeconomic effects of these protected areas. Now, it's not the mandate of the GEF to be working on this area and seeking to improve that, but certainly the GEF is certainly being held to that standard more and more. I think the next time this evaluation is done, because there will be a next time, probably the standard we need to be thinking about is the socioeconomic effects of GEF investments and being able to assess those in a way that's equally as robust as the biodiversity impacts. And perhaps, Arun, just as a question, if you could comment on what exactly defines community engagement in terms of the analysis that came out of the evaluation plan.
Thanks very much, and even if I sometimes know who you are, so maybe you can still introduce yourselves also for the lifeline. And so then it's Yasmin next, and then Yasmin first.
Yes. Thank you. This is Yasmin Birov with the Hgf Secretariat. First of all, it's wonderful to hear the findings of this report. Thank you very much. I started my career with working on protected areas and designing Hgf protected areas. So 25 years after the fact, it's great to know that you have found that to be effective. And I agree with Gustavo that the protected areas are the Hgf legacy. It's a public investment, and it's supposed to be sustainable. My question is kind of related to your question in two folds. One is the forward-looking, what does sustainability mean? We have entrusted these protected areas, this global public investment, to the governments that are actually coming up with systems and budgets and processes that govern them in the countries. And there is no time limit. It's supposed to be until, infinity, right? We make the investment. It's a global public investment. The governments are responsible for making sure that investment stays in place until forever. How are we as the Hgf, as the global public, making sure that that's happening? Because up until this point, we've had, for example, as Secretariat, received from various places around the world that there is encroachment upon some of these protected areas, that, governments change, politics change, and priorities change, and therefore they may just overturn the status of a particular area because it's close to water, and so it's perfect cooling water for a thermal power plant or something like that. Do we have any systems that allow us to be aware of these kinds of things and to intervene? Do we have a right to intervene, or how should we do it? That's one question I wanted to ask. If anything like that has come out of your assessments or your field visits or communications with government, etc. And the other thing was the point that was raised about sustainability into the future, looking at the changing planet. Climate change is one very real issue. We had in the past year at the Hgf presentations about, for example, migration, species migrations happening due to changing temperatures around different parts of the world, and especially in areas where most of our protected areas are located. So, of course, we have to protect the assets that we have now, but are we looking into the future and seeing, in a couple decades, actually these species will be moving northward because it's getting very hot here, but where they're going to go are now full of cities, or they're building roads, or, there's a lot of different kind of development. Should we be now talking to governments about, okay, so what should they be doing when they're thinking about, land development 2-3 decades into the future? Is there a way for us to do that in collaboration with governments for future protection of areas where the migrating species can find a place to live? So that was a question I had.
Okay, thanks. And then, please.
Yes, Juan Carlos Martinez from the Vermont Center for Eco Studies Caribbean Program. I have a question about the methodology, and has to do with if there's any way in the study that you have control for budget allocation, because obviously areas that receive more funding, whether it's Hgf or whatever, are going to be better off than those who receive less funding. So I don't know if that was something considered during the design of the study. And also, if there is any plan to publish the results in a peer-reviewed journal to give the credibility that we all claim to have. And the third one would be, what will be the implications for future GIF funding of this evaluation, if any?
Thanks very much. And maybe Xenia can read the one from online, and then we take the second round.
We actually have 2 questions. So first question was a remark about Nigel, and the response to Nigel's remark, but it looks like this is a question to Gustavo. It comes from Parent Hey Eddie. It says, is Nigel's remark about traditional governance by indigenous people and local communities already covered by GEF 5 and GEF 6 strategies? And another question comes from Mike Marcier, Conservation International. Thanks for the interesting presentation and congratulations on the evaluation. As the previous speaker mentioned, protected areas are not necessarily in place in perpetuity. To what extent, if at all, did the GEF evaluation address protected area downgraded, downsizing, and divestment? Sorry, the legal changes that temper protected area regulations, shrink boundaries, or eliminate legal protections. So PADDD, protected area downgrading, downsizing, and divestment, is widespread and a commonplace, including many of the places where the GF works. PADDtracker.org has data on this.
Thanks very much. Let's take a break here and let the panelists respond. Some of them were clearly to Jeff Secretary and some to Nigel and then to
Thank you. This is very good questions. I'm going to lump a few because they're basically related to the same topic. For example, the question of what are the landscapes of the future, and who the hell knows, right? That's the first response, and I say this because what we are seeing in field research these days is that some of the original assumptions that species migrate in a linear fashion, species range, they have a particular way of modeling, etc. Many of these things are not turning out to be true. And interestingly enough, what we are seeing is that places where you have protected habitats in wider landscapes, they are withstanding impacts of climate change and projections of climate change movement much better than places that do not have it. So I don't know what that landscape will look like, but certainly landscapes that have as an anchor and as a backbone a series of well-represented protected areas, those are the ones that are going to be, I think, most resilient into the future. But we also need to understand how connectivity, needs to be built into these systems. What are the weak links? And I think the research is going to be informing decisions that we make as we improve our strategy. We are not a research institutions; we are consumers of that kind of work. On another point about socioeconomic effectiveness, etc., and I think it was Tom and somebody else who mentioned this. That's important, but I tend to not fall prey to that argument entirely, because when we say that we are funding $3.4 billion in grants over 20 years to produce the kind of results that we are seeing here, it's too much of a burden to expect that this investment also needs to take care of socioeconomic situations on places where these investments are being made for public environmental goods purpose to begin with. This is not to discard the fact, and that Terrence from the UNDP just mentioned here, that we have a very, and the UNDP and other agencies have a very well-developed community engagement work, but we shouldn't put it on the shoulders of these sites, which are already vulnerable from a multiple perspectives, the burden of also having to carry the development objectives of that, the surrounding. And so we need to be very careful not to build too much expectation on a tool that has, of course, its strengths, as we heard here, but also its limitations. So I think we need to look at the landscape as a whole, and then we will know where this question of a socioeconomic effectiveness needs to be built on. Just a question on climate change and habitat loss modeling, etc. We have a project that actually will begin implementation pretty soon, involving CI and WWF and others. And other research is called the SPARK. Everything has to have an acronym. That's looking at how it's actually a modeling tool to look at protected areas in the context of and species conservation in the context of climate change. So we hope that we can use that modeling in making funding decisions and helping agencies do that. The other question about climate change versus other aspects in terms of biodiversity conservation. again, if we look at the literature as we have it today, habitat loss is still the largest driver of biodiversity loss. It's not climate change yet. It will become, etc. So this is the time that really we need to invest as much as we can in protection of habitat and making landscapes as connected and as sustainable as possible, because climate change is not coming. When it comes full throttle, we'll have to have resilient landscapes. And Mike Massia, he's been a champion of this agenda, which is very, very important, the PAD agenda, on how many protected areas are being degazetted around the world. It's not, from what I understand of his work, an active phenomenon. It's one that we need to keep track. We have in many places push towards that. We are facing this again in Brazil, for example, at the legislative level. There's tremendous push by the agribusiness lobby to degazette some protected areas, to reduce the size of indigenous lands, which actually protect biodiversity. So we need to look at that very carefully, and it needs to be in our horizon.
Thanks very much. Shall we go in, or maybe Aaron then regarding those questions to the evaluation?
Okay. Yes. Yes. On the socioeconomic issues, I think you've covered very well, and the issues is very for a institution like GEF. It's very important to keep in mind that we are about global environmental benefits, and there is not that much money going into these things globally, you know. So when we talk about socioeconomic interactions with the environment, we're talking about stressing factors. When this happens, then GF should get involved, basically. But we're not advocating a full engagement of GF becoming a development agency. The funds will stop existing because of the nature of the way that GF is funded and the nature of our council works. We have to understand that, and I agree with Gustavo very much on that. On the issue of we will have another evaluation coming up now with Anna and Janine on multiple benefits. They will look deeper into the socioeconomic benefits as one of the main dimensions. We'll look cross-focal areas, but also socioeconomic benefits. So stay tuned. This should be very interesting. Now the other issue on sustainability. You know, what is sustainable? I agree with Gustavo. What is going to be the future? I mean, this is so unpredictable. You know, I mean, we don't know what climate change will bring by. But one of the things that we can say, I mean, Gustavo talked about this notion of what type of landscapes are the ones that will be the most resilient. But we have to look at what are the conditions of the human governance systems that are more resilient as well. And what we have found basically is that high professionalism, credibility, funding, independent funding, and political profile are very important to be building, and that actually allows for an adaptive management capacity for people there to be able to move the way they need to move because of the uncertainty that is coming up. And we do have examples on the interactions with these larger issues. As I mentioned, there was Sierra de Manantlan, the biodiversity corridor in Central America. Those are very good examples. In Mexico, not the rest of Central America. We're talking this is a very different situation in Mexico as the rest of Central America. And Monarca, Mariposa Monarca, actually is an emblematic protected area in Mexico that in the last 5 years has done a big turnaround towards good protection because of this being able to deal with the intersectorial nature of the problem and bringing local communities that have traditional rights on the factory. You know, so local communities are definitely important. Now, on the budget issue that you mentioned, yes, it was very difficult to actually, we tried to do that and we really looked at different parts, but I can tell you there are propensity score matching analysis in Mexico does take it into account because all of the GF supplier protected areas got budgets, basically similar amounts of budgets. The other ones were not getting the amounts of budgets, and of course, this is a major factor having to do with management, the amount of resources that exist, the amount of staff that you can hire, etc.
Thank you.
A couple of
couple of additions. I think that Tom's comment on the socioeconomic aspects, what I understood you to be saying, Tom, was that as you expand this evaluation work, understanding better the socioeconomic impacts of the investment. So not that you should do what the World Bank is doing, but that you, in terms of investing in the development, but understanding the impacts of these investments on those aspects, and that seems quite compelling to me. In terms of Yasmin's plea for systems for intervening when things go wrong, we've seen some dramatic examples with some of the UNESCO World Heritage sites and campaigns around those, and those have been interesting and limited in their impact, the ability to respond. But I think it relates to what's fundamentally needed, which is the accountability within the countries when things go wrong. So there's a very limited role for us to be responding internationally, and that can of course backfire dramatically as well when nationalism is rising, which is often the case when crises are occurring. And so what we need to understand better is how you strengthen the systems of accountability domestically. What is it that our investments can do in that realm? And there, I think, greatly enhancing public access to basic information, understanding the significance of some of that information, and supporting local constituencies who will use that information for civil society to demand accountability when governments are doing a very bad job or shifting priorities in ways that are perhaps not justified. I think that's certainly the aspect of this that we work on very intensively and do see some success with in some places.
Thanks very much. So we have time for a second round, and I have here already 4. Do we have one on the online? So that's a nice hope. It's a fifth one. So let's wear the first one. So.
Hello, my name is Annika Kalt. I'm working at the Inter-American Development Bank in Environmental Safeguards Unit. I haven't read the whole report, so the impact evaluation. So I wonder, have you covered the topic of leakage? So the biodiversity laws, forest cover laws outside of the protected areas you're supporting, and then regarding Gustavo's statement that you're keen to have a biodiversity conservation and forest loss and avoiding forest loss on a broader, wider landscape basis. Do you consider any mechanisms or any interventions to avoid biodiversity loss and forest cover loss outside of protected areas?
Thanks very much. Yeah, please.
Meg Flemington with WWF. I look forward to reading the full report. I haven't read it yet, but congratulations on an amazing piece of work. And I just wanted to comment back on Nigel's request to unpack a little bit the management effectiveness issues. And I think that the data set that's going to be coming out of the RAPAMs that are being done for ARPA in Brazil could really help with that, because I think it's going to be a very unusual data set, because there'll be 3 5-year intervals, 2005, 2010, and 2015, for the same sets of protected areas, GEF versus non-GEF, because the RAPAM is being done on all of those areas for those 3 intervals. So you could actually look at which aspects of the management effectiveness are impacting the improved management. So that should be coming out in about 6 months, so it's not too far away. And then on the issue of monitoring and forest cover as a proxy, that's also something we're really struggling with in protected areas, because when you have a very limited budget, maybe 1 or 2 indicators is maybe all you can cover, and how can we really get at this issue of species loss and degradation? If anybody's been listening to the NPR pieces on the Amazon, degradation, is very difficult to catch through remote sensing data.
Okay. Yeah, please.
I think that was really this is an excellent report. Chris Warner from the World Bank, and like the other people around the table, I look forward to reading it in its entirety. A question I've got to the team really is that we've discussed the issue of landscapes and how to finance a system of sustainable protected areas. We know that there are many pressures on the outside of the protected areas. At the same time, we have comparative advantages as the GF family. And did you make any findings on that sort of issue of how we could better leverage this vast GF family in terms of really bringing the development finance to the table? As you correctly point out, this is not the role of GF to sort out all the development issues. But I think there's a great opportunity here to be able to leverage the comparative advantages of the different institutions. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Thanks very much. And let's go to them. Yeah.
Matthew Baer, Rainforest Alliance. Some of these points have already been brought up just recently, but I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit more to the issue of attribution. So, for example, what are some of the specific GEF activities and activities in the protected areas that might be supporting the reduction of the deforestation rates in the areas that you studied in your analysis? And one additional point there could be perhaps, is there non-GF funding that's also going on in these protected areas? So is it possible that the protected areas that were selected in your studies were sort of these pilot areas that were then also being supported by additional donors and additional NGOs? And do you have some more insight into, were those GEF activities, were those a certain set of activities that might have contributed towards the reduction in deforestation compared to activities being undertaken by local communities, by local government, by additional NGOs?
Jen, did you want to add something? Please go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to emphasize on the interconnection with the economic, social, environmental factors. I didn't mean that Jeff should be funding the economic part, but that they should make those issues well known to get support from the other agencies and things like that, and to make people aware that these things are very important. I have a minor question based on Indonesia, the recent stories about the massive forest burning there, to what extent that has affected any of the protected areas there, and certainly what it's done to the environment.
And then Xenia, maybe you can read. We have one or more.
Yes, we have one question from Marcelo Lima from the World Conservation Monitoring Center. He says that the World Conservation Monitoring Center has the CBD mandate to collate the information for the databases, for the for the World Database on Protected Areas and similar. So he says, besides the WDTA, we also host the Global Database on Protected Areas Management Effectiveness. Data is available, but we also lack funding to maintain this. In your opinion, what financial mechanism could be established to make information more available to more decision makers and public in general?
Thanks very much. Who wants to tackle this?
I can start with a few of the comments. First one, on leakage, I'll let Aaron mention if anything was done on this, but let me mention another evaluation that was done actually by the IEG, the Independent Evaluation Office of the World Bank, on a subset of these protected areas that Jeff has funded, again in the Amazon, and they look at impaired sites, if there was any leakage that they could notice, and in fact they didn't notice any significant leakage by the protected areas that were created, for example, by the ARPA project. I'm not sure if you're able to do that because of methodological limitations, but it's an important question. The question of biodiversity loss outside protected areas, and again, protected areas are good for certain things. They're not necessarily ideal for everything. There are species that are landscape species, I would say. They only will persist if they have a biodiversity-friendly environment outside of protected areas. That's why it's so important to manage the system from the outside in and from the inside out. And that's the entire gist of the biodiversity strategy, looking at both the protected area sites as well as the larger landscape, to mainstreaming practices in the larger landscape that enable biodiversity that has to depend on that larger landscape to survive over time. So it's not a panacea, but it's important to track that too. Chris, you're absolutely correct. And in fact, it was probably an omission on our part to actually mention that the Hgf only provides a piece of the financing package that has to deal with global environmental benefits, and in many cases associated with development assistance from the World Bank, from the IDB, from technical assistance. And actually that helps to ensure that the investment that we're making on these global public goods are embedded into development objectives, and that has value in its own. And again, that's very important, and I think it needs to be tracked very well. Maybe the evaluation will say something about it. The question about attribution, that didn't respond, but I think you mentioned a very interesting question that has come often to us, which is, are you not kind of picking the winners, right? So you already have certain places that you're naturally driven to because of a variety of considerations, and some of these are driven by, let's say, charismatic species that everybody tends to flock around. And in a way, you are prejudging, the outcome. I think we looked into that question a while ago, and because of the nature of the system and how we provide funding is provided to every country through an allocation system. We believe that kind of dilutes a bit the problem that you're addressing, but it's something that we need to consider seriously every time that we make this decision. Marcelo from WCMC mentioned, the WCMC has tremendous value for the global community, increasingly more. And all these protected areas, all these databases, from the protected area database to now the global database of protected area effectiveness, have been constructed with resources that were patched together by NGOs and others. It's very difficult for an organization like ours to really provide resources because we don't have it. Most of our resources are in the hands of countries. And paradoxically, countries are not willing to take a little bit of their own resources to global and regional projects. And this has to change. And I think it's a matter of us as a community convincing our donors, our Hgf Council, et cetera. There are certain investments in knowledge infrastructure that will enable our portfolio to become a better portfolio and a higher quality portfolio. But it's something that needs to be done across the board by our agencies, by our executing partners, by countries.
Thanks very much.
Okay. I have some comments on.
Just a couple of quick things. So the leakage issue is very interesting, and it's a good one to bring up. We see some very, I think, strong evidence of that with the following the Brazilian government's heroic efforts to reduce deforestation in the Amazon, with remarkable results, and a shift in habitat destruction into the Cerrado region, another major biome in Brazil. I think there's emerging data that clearly shows that, and it's harder to monitor. It's not seen by everyone as forest, so it's not such a big deal, but it is a very big deal, of course. And some leakage into the Gran Chaco region of Paraguay, Bolivia, Argentina, which now has some of the highest rates of habitat loss in the world in terms of percentage terms. And also we saw a similar story with China when they dramatically improved protection of remaining forest areas and shifts in logging industries outside to neighboring countries. And we now see some of the highest rates and other development. We see some of the highest increasing rates of deforestation and tree cover loss, both in primary forest loss in the neighboring countries and other countries where China has the greatest engagement through business activities, the wider Mekong region, Papua New Guinea, West Africa. So the leakage question is a really significant one and very challenging to monitor and understand. To Judge's point on the fires in Indonesia, which we're monitoring day to day with Global Forest Watch, we actually have some blogs which show, they're very depressing. If you want to be very depressed, you can see entire protected areas literally going up in smoke over the last few weeks. And what you can conclude from that is that when certain key aspects of land management go wrong, you create the preconditions for absolutely catastrophic change. So Indonesia's just tripled its greenhouse gas emissions over the last 6 weeks. Its annual emissions have just tripled, and it just surpassed Russia and moved up to 4th place in the global ranking from emissions over a period of 6 weeks. It's actually not far away from India now. If you shifted the 12-month measure from a calendar year and moved it forward a little bit, and the El Nino continues to hit through the first quarter of 2016, there's a chance that you would see Indonesia's emissions surpass India's, and the daily emissions already surpassed those of the United States during this period, which is an economy 22 times larger than Indonesia's. So that's what happens when this isn't done right. The results are extraordinary, dramatic, and that's a great wake-up call for those who think that we can, divest from these things periodically because there's other more important things to do.
Yes, on the leakage issue, I agree with both. It's very difficult to deal with it, basically. We did try to address it by looking at a condition within the marshes of the protected area in a 10-kilometer radius, in a 25-kilometer radius. So trying to see if there were differences. We didn't find too many in the global analysis, but when we went to the field, in some cases they're big. Vietnam, for example, Babet. I mean, you can see where the protected area is, basically. I mean, there's in Mexico too. You go to some of those protected areas, you can see that you can see those you can see through the satellite the difference with Mexico and Guatemala, for example. So in Rio Lagartos as well. In fact, with help of Jim, actually, we use high resolution remote sensing, 50-centimeter pixels, to be able to look at areas that were problematic and to see what happened, to see what was happening in Monarca. We could count how many trees were cut. We could count cows inside the protected area in Rio Lagartos as well. So there's a possibility. When we wanted to go and understand more, there was a possibility. And this gets a little bit to that issue of the forest composition, for example. When you have this type of technology, it is possible to start looking at forest composition, diversity in the forest, not so much at what's under the forest, right? But you can get at some of the ecological diversity issues already now, actually. But you cannot do it globally yet. But indeed, Jim offered to say, okay, I want to take a couple of places around the world, and I'll get you the data, to classify it, we'll analyze it for you. He did, and it works.
In 1 week.
In one, he was very quick as well, actually. No, but very excellent work. But so on the Met and this issue of what variables are considered for management, the management effectiveness tracking tool has 32 variables, and they're quite thorough. I think there's too many variables, but indeed those can be disaggregated. The level of compliance with answering those 32 variables is quite low, so they have to be somehow consolidated so that you get more consistent information, basically. But indeed, you can actually look at what's going on. It's not just one indicator that say it's being managed well or not. It's quite a sophisticated tool in that regard. And of course, WCMC, the World Conservation Mountain Center, has played a big role in doing that. It was very helpful to us. The data that they did is very, very important. They really should be supported in some way. On the comparative advantages of Hgf, yes, Hgf has some comparative advantages. Hgf has been there for the long run in many countries, and working through governments has opened space for participation of civil society engagement, and build support for national budgets to the environment, basically, particularly to protected areas. Hgf, interestingly enough, through its co-financing requirements, has actually brought many other players and helped coordinate funding to specific activities. It's not just for biodiversity, but for other areas as well. And indeed, there are many other players And Hgf is not the only player here, but Hgf is really has that sort of a convening role in the credibility to convene. And initially, we found this over and over in our evaluations in the last 5 years, actually, throughout the, not just in protected areas. And on attribution. Attribution is a tough question, and we were able to establish attribution with propensity score matching in Mexico. That is as sophisticated as you can get in these type of situations for doing attribution, basically. For other ones, we're just talking basically of directions. We're triangulating and making sure that when hitting it from different places, basically, in somewhat redundant ways, and seeing what is the direction. And that's the best that can be done now. But in some cases, we can say yes, from this time to this time, this can be attributed to Hgf. Even though there were other players involved, there are always other players involved, but there are other players involved with Hgf and without Hgf as well.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we are out of time, but this is very useful for us in the evaluation office also, because we get a lot of, first of all, positive feedback, which we appreciate very much, but also we have to continue improving our work and our analysis in the future, and we need this feedback from the community. So I would like to thank Nigel and Gustavo for coming here and sharing their thoughts and responses to the evaluation. Of course, Aaron and the evaluation teams in the Hgf, UNDP, and all the partner organizations and so on. But most of all of you for participating so actively. I think this has been really an interesting and good discussion. And last but not least, I would like to thank Senia and our colleague Manuela Pui, who actually organized this workshop or the seminar here, and got you all around this room or your computers abroad and elsewhere. But we shall continue these discussions, and we'll have other seminars and other evaluations to discuss in the future. So stay tuned, and thank you very much.